Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of CRT's Cozy Corner, Shakespeare Edition. I am so excited because today we're going to be reading a delightful Shakespearean romp. It maybe doesn't have as much name recognition as some of the plays we've read so far, but it does have one of my very favorite stage directions of all time, Exit Pursued by Bear. If you were working on a production, how would you make that happen? Would you cast an actual bear? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, the play is, of course, The Winter's Tale. So if we're ready, let's go ahead and take a deep breath. Good. And let's get started. My dear friend, I've been here for 9 months. I really must go home. Bohemia needs its king. King Polixenes smiled apologetically at his friend Leontes, the king of Sicily. But surely you could stay just a little longer, Leontes pleaded. Just a week is all I ask. It was a surprisingly warm and sunny afternoon for midwinter. Leontes, his heavily pregnant wife Hermione, and his old childhood friend Polixenes were strolling in the palace courtyard, while the young prince, Mamillius, played happily in a corner. Hermione, why aren't you helping? Leontes complained. Say something to make him stay. Hermione laughed. Dear husband, I was only waiting for you to say the obvious, that Bohemia is doing just fine without him, Polixenes. Hermione turned to her husband's friend. You can spare us just 1 more week, can't you? She gave him her most winning smile, and taking him by the arm, she gently steered him away from her husband. Will you stay? No, madam, Polixenes began, but Hermione wasn't going to take no for an answer, and she continued to wear him down. Eventually, Leontes impatiently interrupted. Is he won yet? Yes, my dear, he's won, Hermione turned with a satisfied smile, and defeated, Polixenes sighed his agreement. Well done, I couldn't get him to stay, and you have. The smile on Leontes' face suddenly faded, and his expression was replaced by a far darker one. A terrible thought had occurred to him. How could his wife have convinced his best friend so easily when he could not? Unless there was more to their friendship than met the eye. He was suddenly filled with doubt, then fear, anger, and finally an intense and deadly jealousy. Too familiar, too close, he muttered, as his wife and Polixenes, hand in hand, continued to talk. Look how they touch each other, the way they smile. He shuddered and looked away. His son, still playing quietly, suddenly caught his attention. Mamillius, my boy. Mamillius came running to his father, who ruffled his hair roughly. You are my fine young fellow, aren't you? Glancing over, Polixenes noticed the sudden change in Leontes' mood. Are you all right, my friend? He asked. Fine, Leontes replied, a tight, thin smile on his face. Mamillius and I are just going for a walk, but why don't you and Hermione stay and talk? Polixenes gave a little bow. We'll be in the garden. Yes, do whatever you want. I'll find you, Leontes said airily, thinking, I'll give them enough space to give way what they're really up to. He shooed them away. His smile now so tight it almost cracked. Off you go, the pair of you. Leontes watched them as they walked away together, jealousy taking a stronger and stronger hold of his thoughts. Suddenly, everything they did, the way they moved, the way they smiled, everything spoke of just one thing to him: treachery. By the time his old friend Camillo found him, the idea that Hermione was having an affair with Polixenes had become a fact in Leontes' mind. You must have seen it, Camillo, Leontes hissed. Surely it's obvious that she's unfaithful. For a moment, Camillo was speechless. He couldn't believe such a thing of the queen, but he was more shocked even by what Leontes had to say next. You, Camillo, you are his cupbearer, aren't you? You could put something in his drink. Leontes' voice grew calmer and more cruel. Something that will make that drink his last. Camillo held back a gasp. He couldn't afford to let the king know that he disagreed with him, especially given Leontes' current situation. Clearly a rational state of mind. I could, my lord, although if I were to do this, I would give him a poison that would make it seem as if he died of natural causes. he ventured, playing for time. But I still can't believe that. Do you really think I'd make this up? Leontes snapped. That I'd put myself through all of this if it were not true? Camillo shook his head. I believe you, sir. I'll do as you ask. What else could he say? He knew what Leontes would do if he refused. Yet, if Camillo did this, he knew there was really only one thing he could do. Leave. Leave the palace, the country. Leave his life behind, or, in all probability, lose his life. Good day, Camillo. Camillo almost jumped out of his skin. He'd been so absorbed in the dreadful train of thought that he hadn't noticed Polixenes approaching. Do you know what's wrong with Leontes? Polixenes asked. You'd think he'd lost part of his kingdom the way he's acting. I dare not know, my lord, Camillo replied miserably. Dare not or do not, Polixenes insisted. What on earth do you mean, man? Camillo looked away. There is a sickness which makes some of us feel very ill. I cannot say what it is called, but it was caught from you, even though you are well. What do you mean? Oh, come on, Camillo, what's wrong? Will I catch it? What can I do to prevent myself from doing so? Sir, Camillo sighed, then blurted out. The king has ordered me to murder you. He thinks you're having an affair with his wife. Polixenes was astounded and horrified. How could the king possibly think such a thing of his best friend? But Camillo soon persuaded him that it was no use trying to understand Leontes' madness, or trying to reason with him. Polixenes had to leave, and as quickly as possible. They agreed that he would set sail for Bohemia straight away, and that Camillo would go with him. Hermione was in the garden with Mamillius, completely unaware of all of this. It would not be long now until her baby was born. She'd never felt so happy. Come, Mamillius, tell me a happy story, she said, patting the bench for her son to come and sit beside her. A sad tale's best for winter, Mamillius replied solemnly. But he'd barely begun his story when Leontes strode into the garden with a group of lords hurrying after him. Was he here? Was Camillo with him? Leontes barked. Yes, I saw them both. One of the lords replied. They were making for the ships. Ha! I was right all along, and this proves it. They were plotting to murder me, Leontes cried. Give me the boy, he said, seizing his son by the arm. He may look like me, but he takes far too much after you for my liking, he said, glaring at his wife. Hermione's smile had faded. What is this? Take the boy away, the king ordered his lords. I don't want him anywhere near her, or... He pointed at Hermione's pregnant belly, a look of utter disgust on his face. That brat of Polixenes. He has betrayed me. Take her to prison. How could you say such a thing? It's not true, Hermione cried in disbelief. But Leontes had made up his mind. His wife was a traitor, and nothing Hermione or anyone else said could convince him otherwise. Hermione was taken away to prison, where she was forbidden all contact with anyone but her maids. Even her friend, Lady Paulina, was not allowed through the prison gates. She was standing outside them when she heard the news that Hermione had given birth prematurely to a baby girl. A maid brought the baby inside for her to see. So beautiful, so innocent, Paulina murmured, holding the little bundle in her arms. An idea came to her. She would take the baby to Leontes and make another plea on Hermione's behalf. Surely seeing this baby will soften his heart, Paulina thought. But she couldn't have been more wrong. Leontes was in a foul mood when Paulina approached him, a foul mood made worse by the fact that he hadn't slept and that his son Mamillius had been taken ill. Get her out of here, Leontes offered. Get rid of this spy. His look of pure hatred was terrifying, but Paulina was not a woman to be put off by Leontes' foul mood. I am no spy, she said calmly. I'm just as honest as you are mad. Traitor, Leontes shouted. Will no one get rid of her? Antigonus, he turned to one of his lords, Paulina's husband. Why can't you control your wife? There is only one traitor here, Paulina said quietly, and that is you. You are a traitor to your wife, to your son, and, she laid the baby girl down in front of Leontes, to your newborn baby. That brat is not mine, Leontes spat. It's Polixenes. The baby and its mother should be burned alive. Now get out! Everyone gasped, but Paulina was not deterred. All right, I'll go. But look at your baby, my lord. Look at her. She is yours. Mine? Mine, Leontes exploded. Antigonus, take it away and have it killed, he commanded. And then, when Antigonus made no move to do so, if you won't do it, I'll kill it with my own hands. When Antigonus reluctantly picked up the child, doubt flashed across Leontes' face and he changed his mind. Instead of having the baby killed, he ordered Antigonus to take her to some remote place and leave her there. Perhaps by chance she'd survive. Perhaps she would not. Antigonus was horrified, but agreed. After all, it was better than the alternative, wasn't it? Antigonus had already left Sicily when the news arrived that 2 servants had come back from Delphos in Greece. Leontes had sent them to consult the oracle of the gods to find out if Hermione was really guilty, and they brought back the answers on a sealed scroll. Leontes summoned Hermione and all the lords of the palace to hear what he was sure would be the proof of her guilt. Read the charges. Leontes' face was a stony mask of hatred. An officer read, Hermione, Queen of Sicily, you are accused of treason, of being unfaithful to the king, and of plotting to have him killed. There is little point in my saying that I am not guilty, Hermione said when the officer had finished, given that whatever I say will not be believed. But you, my lord, she turned to Leontes, know that in the past I have been as faithful and honest as I am now unfortunate. If you are bad enough to have committed this crime, you are bad enough to lie, Leontes snapped. Hermione soon realized that there was nothing she could say to change her husband's mind. She hardly cared now anyway. Everything she valued had been taken away from her. So the scroll was brought forward and the seals broken. Read it, Leontes commanded. The messenger read, Hermione is faithful. Polixenes is blameless. Camillo honest. Leontes a jealous tyrant. The innocent baby is his child, and the king shall live without an heir if that which is lost is not found. For a split second, there was a stunned silence. Then, a general murmuring of relief until Leontes burst out, The oracle is false! It's false, I tell you! But he was interrupted by a servant rushing in. My lord, what is it? Snapped Leontes. Oh, sir, it's your son. Your son is gone. Gone where? He is dead, the servant replied. Leontes let out a small cry and Hermione fainted to the floor. You've killed her, Paulina screamed. She's not dead. She's just upset. Leontes looked truly shaken. She'll recover. Look after her. As Hermione was carried away, the king dropped to his knees in remorse. I will apologize to Polixenes, he said desperately. I will woo my queen again. I will call the good Camillo back. But it was all too late. Paulina rushed back, her face ashen with grief. The queen is dead. Meanwhile, Antigonus had already taken the baby to Bohemia. He'd had a dream in which Hermione had told him to leave her there. He gently laid the child on a bed of leaves in the forest and placed a box beside her. The box contained gold and jewels and a letter stating where the baby had come from and her name, which in his dream Hermione had told him was Perdita. It broke Antigonus' heart to leave the tiny baby, but he could not disobey his king. As he walked away from her, he heard a noise. Turning, he saw a huge bear. He started to run, but with a fearful roar, it pursued him. I'm gone forever, he cried out, fleeing further into the forest with the beast at his heels. Not long after, a shepherd and his son arrived at the same spot. They didn't see the baby at first, but when she began to cry, the shepherd scooped her up, marveling at his discovery. Only then did he spot the box. He couldn't believe his eyes when he opened it. He was rich! He decided to take the baby home and bring her up as his own, vowing to tell no one else about the box. 16 long years passed. Perdita grew up happily, believing herself to be a shepherd's daughter. Her true father, Leontes, was still tormented by the guilt of what he'd done. Camillo stayed with Polixenes in Bohemia, and the two became great friends. One day, Camillo received a letter from Sicily. It was from Leontes, begging him to return home. He had been feeling homesick, and so he broached the matter with Polixenes. Polixenes did not want him to go. I need you here, he said, and please don't mention the king of Sicily again. So Camillo agreed to stay, but from then on, his longing to go home grew. In the meantime, however, there was a mystery to solve. Polixenes' son, Florizel, had been spending a lot of time away from the palace, and rumor had it he was spending it with a certain shepherd's daughter who went by the name of Perdita. Polixenes was determined to get to the bottom of the matter, and he asked Camillo to help him. One warm summer's day, not long after Camillo had heard from Leontes, a scruffily dressed man was ambling along the road near the shepherd's cottage, singing cheerfully. His name was Autolycus, and he was a notorious cheat, a thief, a confidence trickster, a con man. His singing came to a sudden stop when he saw a young man approaching, and he flung himself to the ground. "Help, help!" he cried out pathetically. "I've been robbed!" The shepherd's son came rushing over. "What happened?" "They took all my money and all my clothes and left me with these rags," he groaned pitifully. "Let me help you." The shepherd's son leaned down to pull Autolycus up from the ground, and as he did so, Autolycus slipped his hand into the man's pocket and stole his purse. "Who did this to you?" asked the shepherd's son. "I heard that rogue Autolycus is up to his tricks in these parts." Autolycus nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, it must have been him." "Well, if you're all right, I'll be on my way," the shepherd's son said. "I'm off to buy spices for a sheep-shearing celebration." "He won't be buying any spices now. He's had his purse stolen," Autolycus thought, smirking. "But a sheep-shearing party, now that sounded like an excellent opportunity to make some money." At the shepherd's cottage, Perdita and Prince Florizel had stolen a little time for themselves before the festivities began. They had first met when Florizel's hunting bird had flown across the shepherd's land. It had been love at first sight, and since then Florizel had been visiting Perdita, disguised as a shepherd. She was the only one at the cottage who knew he was really a prince. She also knew how much his father, the king, would disapprove of their love for one another if he found out. They were talking happily when the old shepherd burst into the cottage with two strangers. "Daughter, where are your manners? Come and welcome our guests," he cried. The strangers were in fact Polixenes and Camillo in disguise as farmhands. They had followed Prince Florizel to the cabin to find out more about his secret liaisons. Perdita greeted them graciously. She asked them to sit down and busied herself attending to them. Watching her, Polixenes and Camillo could not help but be impressed. The way she spoke and the graceful way she moved suggested that she was something more than just a simple peasant girl. And it was clear that she and Florizel were very, very much in love. Once the celebration was in full swing, Autolycus slipped in among the guests. He was disguised as a peddler, with a tray of ribbons and bangles suspended from his neck. As people flocked to buy trinkets off him, he cunningly set about picking their pockets. Meanwhile, Polixenes had started chatting with Florizel, turning the conversation easily to Florizel's favorite topic, Perdita. Florizel just couldn't help himself. He'd soon told the stranger how much he loved her and how they planned to be married. "An engagement!" cried the shepherd, who'd been listening in. Tears of joy filled his eyes. "Our new friends can witness it." Polixenes and Camillo exchanged quick, worried glances. "But now wait a minute. Does your father know about this?" Polixenes asked Florizel sternly. "He does not, sir, and nor shall he," Florizel answered defiantly. Polixenes frowned. "But surely this is not the behavior of a dutiful son. Certainly a young man should choose his own wife, but surely his father should be at least consulted in the matter." He was trying his best to sound reasonable, but he could feel the anger bubbling up inside him. "I really can't tell him," Florizel replied. The two argued until Florizel said in exasperation, "No, he really can't find out. Now, please do witness our engagement, sir." "You can witness your separation, sir," Polixenes roared, flinging off his disguise. "I hardly dare call you son," he growled. "If you ever see this girl again, I'll disinherit you. You'll never be king of Bohemia. He turned to the shepherd. "You are a common traitor. And as for you," he said to Perdita, his face dark with anger, "if you ever see my son again, I'll come up with a punishment far worse than death." Polixenes stormed out of the cottage, consumed with rage. "King of Bohemia," the shepherd exclaimed, who had really not had any idea who Florizel was. "I told you this would happen," Perdita wailed. But Florizel was undeterred. "I'm sorry, rather than afraid. Our plans are delayed, but nothing has changed. I still love you, and we will still be married." Perdita looked doubtful, but Camillo had a suggestion to make. Throwing off his disguise, he told them his idea. They would sail to Sicily and present themselves to Leontes. The king was so wrecked with guilt about his treatment of Polixenes, he'd be bound to receive them with open arms. The pair agreed to the plan, and Camillo was delighted. Finally, he had an excuse to return home. While Camillo, Perdita, and Florizel discussed the arrangements, Autolycus had wandered back into the room. He was feeling mightily pleased with himself. He picked the pockets of most of the people at the party, and would have picked them all if it hadn't been for the commotion Polixenes had caused. Camillo saw Autolycus and looked him carefully up and down. Florizel needed a new disguise, and this peddler was just his size. They could swap clothes. Well, Autolycus wasn't going to say no to a nice new set of fine clothes, so he quickly agreed. The shepherd and his son were deep in conversation when Autolycus, dressed in his new finery, spotted them. They were debating how best to avoid punishment for Perdita's actions. "Tell the king of the fairies left her," the son was whispering to his father urgently. "See, you have the box, and its contents is proof. She's got nothing to do with us, so we can't be punished, can we?" Autolycus cleared his throat, making the two of them jump out of their skins. "Now then, you two," Autolycus put on his noblest accent, "where might you be off to?" "To the palace, my lord." Neither the shepherd nor his son recognized him as in Florizel's clothes. "Really? Why? What will you be doing there? And with who? I want your address, names, and ages, and anything else I should know," Autolycus barked. "And what's in that box?" He pointed at the bundle the shepherd was trying to hide under his arm. We're just ordinary people, my lord. You're a courtier, aren't you?" "Sir," the shepherd's son replied in awe. "I am indeed," Autolycus replied, puffing himself up, "and I demand to know what your business is." It didn't take much for Autolycus to get them to admit they were going to see the king, but the shepherd was determined not to say what was in the box. Clearly, a different tactic was required. "The king's not at the palace," Autolycus said airily. "He's on a ship preparing to set sail. He must have heard about this business of his son marrying a shepherd's girl. He's in a terrible mood. Right now he's planning horrible punishments for the girl's brother and father." "We should ask him to speak to the king for us," the shepherd's son whispered fearfully to his father. "We could pay him with gold from the box." The shepherd agreed anxiously. Of course, Autolycus graciously agreed to help them. He couldn't help smiling when they parted ways. It wasn't every day that he had a foolish man pour gold into his lap. In Sicily, Leontes and his lords were discussing the topic of his finding a new wife. The king needed an heir, his supporters argued, but Paulina was doing her best to dissuade him. It wasn't difficult. She only had to mention Hermione's death for him to reject the idea. Paulina reminded them all of the oracle's prophecy, too, that there would be no heir until the child that was lost had been found. Clearly, remarrying was not the answer. Just then, a servant entered the room. "King Polixenes' son, Prince Florizel, is here with his wife," he announced. Leontes frowned. It seemed strange that the prince should arrive out of the blue like this. "And his wife, you say?" "Yes, my lord, the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." "Well, go bring them in." When the young prince and his wife entered the room, Leontes was immediately struck by how much Florizel looked like his father had at the same age. He was bowled over by Perdita's beauty. He realized, with a pang of sadness, how she must be about the same age as his lost daughter would have been had she survived. "I'm here to bring greetings from my father, who was too unwell to come himself," Florizel trotted out by his well-rehearsed lie. "And this is my wife, the daughter of the king of Libya." Leontes felt a great rush of happiness, but it was tinged with sadness as he remembered how he'd treated Polixenes. He was also intrigued by Perdita. There was something familiar about her. But before he could work out what it was, the lord rushed in. "The king of Bohemia is here. He's come to fetch his son, who's run away with a shepherd's daughter." A stunned silence fell upon the room. "Where is Polixenes?" Leontes demanded, his voice trembling. "In the city. I've just come from him," the lord replied. "That wretch Camillo betrayed me," Florizel cried out angrily. "You can say that to his face," the lord retorted. "He's here too." "What? Camillo's here?" Leontes asked, overjoyed. "Yes, indeed, sir, and the girl's father and brother, too." "The heavens must be against us," Perdita cried. "We are doomed never to marry." "What? You're not married?" demanded Leontes. "We're not, nor are we likely to be now," Florizel said sadly. "And is this," Leontes indicated Perdita, "really a princess?" "She is," answered Florizel defiantly, "once she is my wife." "That isn't going to happen if your father has anything to do with it," Leontes said gravely. "I'm sorry. Sorry that you have fallen out with him, and sorry that you have fallen in love with a woman whose status is not as great as her beauty." "My dearest," Florizel said gently to Perdita, "luck seems to be against us, but nothing can change our love for one another." To Leontes he said, "I beg you, speak for us. If you ask, my father will grant you any request." I wish that were true, Leontes replied sadly. Your precious princess reminds me of my own beloved wife. But yes, I will talk to him for you. The news spread fast. Soon the whole town was talking about the course of events that had unfolded at the palace. Events so incredible they sounded more like a fairy tale than reality. You should have seen the king's face when he saw Lord Camillo again, one man said. At first, the two of them looked as if the world was about to end. They were so emotional, you couldn't tell if they were happy or sad. Yes, and when the old shepherd showed them his box and the letters that proved Lady Perdita was the king's daughter, another chimed in, well, it all began to make perfect sense. How the young lady looked like her mother and behaved like a princess. The king was overcome with joy. I've never seen so many tears. And when the king met Polixenes, well, a third man had joined the little group outside the palace. They hugged and cried, and the king asked for forgiveness and hugged his new son-in-law-to-be and kissed and hugged his daughter so fervently you'd think he'd never let her go again. It was a sight for sore eyes. Of course, Lady Paulina was devastated to hear how her husband was killed by a bear, the first gentleman added sadly. Apparently, the shepherd's son saw it all. Mind you, not that he's a shepherd now. The king has made him and his father lords. And so the prophecy had been fulfilled. The lost child had been found, the two kings were reconciled, and Florizel and Perdita were to get married. But this was not quite the end of the tale. Paulina told the reunited families that she'd had a statue made of Hermione, which had only just been completed. Of course, they all wanted to see it, so the two kings, their children, and Camillo all set off for Paulina's house. She took them into a room where the statue was kept behind a curtain. She drew back the curtain, and everyone fell silent. She looks so natural, Leontes said after a moment. But Paulina, she has more wrinkles than Hermione did in real life. Only a few, Paulina said, barely hiding a smile. The sculpture carved her to look as if she were alive today. Oh, if only she were alive today, Leontes burst out sadly. You shouldn't look anymore, Paulina said to him, in case wishful thinking makes you believe it's moving. But it is, Leontes cried. Doesn't she look as if she's breathing? He asked the others imploringly. It's true, Polixenes said. It really is amazingly lifelike. You'll think it's alive next, Paulina said. Oh, Paulina, let me think it. Let me have that madness for a while, Leontes begged. I shall kiss her. No, my lord, you must not. You'll spoil the paint on her lips. It's not dry yet, Paulina said. I'll draw the curtain. No, Leontes cried out. Paulina looked at him thoughtfully. He looked so desperately sad, so full of regret. She came to a decision. In that case, she said slowly, either leave or be prepared for something astonishing. I shall make the statue move, and indeed step down from its pedestal and take you by the hand, but, she paused for a moment, a twinkle in her eyes, but you must think I have evil powers. Perhaps. I don't care, Paulina, do it, Leontes begged. Paulina smiled. Very well, she spoke to the statue. Awake. It's time. Come down. Be stone no more. The statue blinked and very slowly seemed to come alive. It stepped down from the pedestal and stood in front of Leontes. Don't startle her, Paulina warned Leontes, and do not turn her away ever again. Give her your hand as you did when she was young, when you wooed her. She's warm, cried Leontes as he took her hand. Tears flowed down his cheeks as Hermione came back to life, embraced him. Perdita rushed forward and Hermione flung her arms around her daughter too. Paulina laughed to see their reunion, but there was a sadness in her eyes as she thought of her dead husband. Leontes called to Camillo. Come, take Paulina's hand. We will all go somewhere more comfortable where we can talk and begin to make up for the time we have all lost. All that day and all the next, the little group laughed and cried and laughed again as they caught up with all that they had missed of each other's lives over the years. There was so much to talk about, and a wedding to plan too. A winter wedding. And a new beginning. The end. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you again next week. Bye.